very sharp angle. Cavaliers throw it ahead to Gonzalez. As he gallops in and one. What a finish by Amari Gonzalez.
This is the Westmoreland on the Hardwood podcast on the Westmoreland Sports Network. Here are your hosts, Jack Ridenauer and Sean Myers.
Welcome into another edition of the Westmoreland on the Hardwood podcast right here on the Westmoreland Sports Network's YouTube channel. Sean Myers, Jack Ridenauer, and Jack, a very big show to get to. We kind of set the stage for the playoffs. We will have our biggest stories with our starting five takeaways. We'll also have plays of the week. Our team of the week, the Greensburg Salem girls, who not only made the playoffs, but had a big-time upset in doing so this past week. And a look ahead at a few remaining regular season games. And then, of course, the playoffs with the brackets coming out sooner rather than later. But let's starting five takeaways, Jack. Pretty much significant implications for the postseason with all these. We'll begin with the Westmoreland County rivalry showdown that everyone had been anticipating. GCC Jeannette on the boys' side. It was basically for section supremacy, and it was the Centurions who held serve at home. Not without some controversy to this game, but GCC sweeps the season series against Jeannette, and they head in almost assuredly the number one seed in Class 2A.
Make no mistake about it. This was a game where Jeannette could have definitely won, especially down the stretch. They were within one for a good portion of that fourth quarter. Big shots down the stretch, though, by GCC. That's what it was. It was really clutch free throw shooting, and then guys like Liam Gallagher hitting massive threes down the stretch. I was really impressed, Sean. I don't know about you, but I felt that Brady O'Rourke for GCC, he really made it a point to insert himself early on. I know that he had some shots that rattled in and out, but he was driving, being aggressive, and even when shots don't fall when you're driving to the lane, you're still forcing the defense to respect that aspect of your game. So that's making the defense become aware of that, and I think he did a great job of forcing Jeannette to play that kind of drop down, drop coverage, come and help over, and it opened up for threes down the stretch of the game, but I felt like it was very similar to the first game where Jeannette came out really strong. But the big thing was their foul trouble. I mean, they got in huge foul trouble early and often, and you could tell Coach Batts was having to play the game of who do I put in and who do I not, going down to to his bench. And I think that's what really showed was the depth from GCC versus Jeannette, and it's night and day. I mean, GCC's got 4 or 5 guys that can come off the bench, maybe not score 10 or 12 points, but in a situation, if somebody gets a third foul, they can kind of cover up 4 or 5 minutes of play. But ultimately, a big game for GCC that was maybe even a momentum shifter that pulls them even further in the direction of being WPIAL champions.
Jeannette has 2 losses this season. Both have come against the Centurions. So I'm sure they are thinking, let's try to have a third crack at it. There's a couple things I want to touch on. First off, for those who weren't tuning in, I was producing that game. I was sitting right next to you, Jack, and yet I couldn't really hear anything you said by and large because that environment was pretty insane. Secondly, the officiating definitely was under the magnifying glass in that game. There were a couple of flop warnings, which are very, very rare at the high school level. I believe one each way, right? One on the Jayhawks, one on the Centurions. Also, to the dismay of Adrian Batts and the Jeannette fans, the buzzer beater to end the first half that went in favor of GCC. We went back and looked. I actually showed you the picture. It was counted. It should not have. Does that make a difference in a game? We'll never know, but it certainly feels like as close as that game was coming down to the wire, maybe it does ultimately make a difference that the Centurions had the narrowest of leads heading into the locker room. So how did you evaluate that aspect of it?
Well, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, that made it, what, a 2-point game or a 4-point game at halftime?
Yeah, it would have been tied. Instead, GCC had a 2-point lead going into the locker room.
And in a game like that, where, again, it was a 1-point game in the fourth quarter, that makes a world of a difference. I think the flop warnings, that was, again, like you said, I think it was just the officiating, knowing, I think I saw there was 400 pre-sold tickets to the event. They were turning people away at the door. So there was a lot of eyes on this game. And like you said, I think the referees and the officiating crew knew that. So they maybe wanted to say, hey, let's make sure that we are, and I think also, let's face it, Jeannette and GCC, it's such a deep rivalry. I'm sure referees are also making sure that they try to keep things in control as best as possible. But seeing 2 in the same game in a high school game, I remember talking with Christian Hyland after the game, after we wrapped up our post-game interview with him, And I asked him, I said, have you seen that at all this year? He said, no, I haven't. He said, I've never seen it once in a high school game this year, let alone twice in the same game. He said, he said, I couldn't tell you the last time I saw that. So very interesting to see that. I think, again, that's just the referees setting the standard of, hey, we're not going to let much fly tonight. But at the same time, there was a couple other calls that were, and I don't want to dive too much into the officiating, obviously, but, if you're going to call it, be consistent the whole way through. And I'm glad that they did one for each side, so both were warned. But the buzzer beater, that's a big one. That's a bookmark situation where you look back and you say, if that doesn't count, it's a tie game. You go into the second half, basically a 0-0 mentality. Maybe we're having a different conversation today, Sean.
Well, that was one Centurions team that got a massive home win. However, the girls could not follow suit. They fell 24 hours earlier, actually, at home against Shady Side Academy. That was also a battle for the section title. The Bulldogs win it. They go 2-0 against GCC. That was a tie game going to the third. Erica Gribble at one point in time completely took that game over, but she couldn't sustain it. Give a lot of credit to Shady Side Academy. They put the clamps down on her. They did just enough in the fourth quarter. That looks like a championship team, but I would say the Centurions, they were much improved from the first time the teams met, where it really kind of was lopsided.
I think that if these teams meet up a third time, it could go to GCC no problem, because and to go back to GCC and Jeannette, you go back to last year. GCC beat Jeannette twice in the regular season, and then in the state playoffs they lose. So that third time, it's hard to beat teams a third time. And I think if you're GCC, you feel pretty good the fact that you made those adjustments. They were almost 30-pieced in the first game between them and the Bulldogs, and they lose in a much tighter, closer fashion. Erica Gribble having 9 points the first meeting, 26 this time around. I think what needs to be the big difference if they do meet up in the playoffs is the depth for GCC. They need to get some help from 2 or 3 other players that come off the bench, because we saw down the stretch, Sean, Shady Side Academy, they had some players that, they weren't Karis Thomas with the ball the entire time and playing, having 15, 20 points. There were players that were hitting big shots, though, down the stretch. The fourth option, the fifth option, massive threes down the stretch. So I think that if there is a third meeting for GCC, for them to win, they need to have that extra depth that steps up. But ultimately, this Bulldogs team looks really good. I think if you've got Karis Thomas running the show, she keeps everything so calm. Everything is it never gets too high, never gets too low. And when you got somebody that can do that in a clutch situation, you could be a really dangerous team for a team that, again, is a year removed from being the reigning 3A champions.
I think there's a scenario, and we'll see how it plays out. The brackets come out Monday afternoon, where GCC and Jeannette are 1-2 on the boys' side in the 2A bracket. Shady Side Academy and GCC could be 1-2 in the girls' 3A bracket. Because even though both of those head-to-head matchups went sweep, 2-0 GCC on the boys' side, 2-0 Shady Side on the girls' side, those two teams, I think, have an argument to be the two best in their classification. So maybe they'll set it up either 1-2 or 1-3, where you would get that matchup if it does occur the third time around in a championship game. So we'll see how it plays out. Centurions have real title aspirations, certainly, on both sides. Well, maybe not talking WPIL title yet, but talking section title, the Kiski Area Cavaliers boys. For the first time since 2013, they are atop the section. They did so with a win at Penn Hills, so they sweep the Indians. And this was so significant for the community, and certainly for Corey Smith, who once many years ago won a couple of titles as a player. Now he wins his first section title as a coach. Amari Gonzalez was incredible in this one. Keller had 22 points to match him. It was a terrific road performance in a very raucous environment. So congrats to the Cavaliers. And now they really have solidified themselves as a top seed in Class 5A as well, I think.
I think what was so impressive about this game, Sean, is that they were able to still win when Penn Hills had 4 guys in double figures. I mean, that's really hard to overcome, especially when you've got guys that, can score in a variety of ways. And I think for Kiski, too, the fact that they've exceeded expectations like this, came into the year, a lot of guys graduated. They lost some key pieces from last year. And then all of a sudden, guys that step up like Jacob Musselman, Amari Gonzalez, you mentioned Colin Keller, 22 points. I mean, I feel like whenever we've mentioned Kiski, we're talking about Musselman or Gonzalez, and you have guys like Keller stepping up and leading the way. Then I think the biggest stat of the entire night, Carson Hindley and Tyler McDermott combined for 17 rebounds between the two of them. If you can
get 17 contested rebounds, it felt like, Jack.
And when you can get that from two guys, just two guys, that's a huge one up in the rebounding department. And I will go on record by saying 90% of the time you look at teams that win and lose, you look at the rebounding battle. If the team that wins the rebounding battle more times than not will win the game. And so I think that was the big key down the stretch, just dominating the glass. So Kiski's going to be fun to watch in the playoffs. I think they're going to be a really, really fun team to watch this postseason.
Yeah, remember they pulled off an upset in the first round of the playoffs against Peters Township a year ago, and we had a chance to talk to Corey Smith. You could tell how much it meant to him afterwards. I did not think that this team was going to be one that was contending for a section title this year after they graduated some really good players. But man, oh man, it was the grit and the hustle that really, I think, separated them from Penn Hills in that contest. Well, how about a perfect regular season, Jack? It is very rare, but unbelievably was achieved by the Penn-Trafford girls. And they had themselves quite a week. If they weren't already chosen as our team of the week, they would have gotten it again this time, because they not only knocked off Indiana to claim the section title, but how about what they did on Saturday, winning at Upper St. Clair? And that win might be the most significant in terms of their candidacy to potentially get the top seed in Class 5A.
Sean, I agree with you. However, I think the fact that they won the section title by 20 plus points, they were encroaching upon a 30-point mercy rule on Indiana for the section title. I think that right there shows how good PT is. And in my opinion, they're the best team in 5A. They should be the number one seed. No question about it. No doubt in my mind. Like you mentioned about Upper St. Clair, that win speaks volumes, undefeated. But again, when you win your section title by a blowout, again, it was getting to be a 30-point mercy rule. That shows just, and they ran through, mind you, ran through the section, okay? Indiana was the only team this whole section scheduled to be within striking distance. That was 13 points in the first meeting. Them and Greater Latrobe, when we saw them have that incredible comeback, ultimately fell short. Those are the two teams that really, since Norwin, a 6A team, has really had a chance to beat up on PT. So in my mind, they're no doubt the number one seed. No question about it. You can clip this. You can mark this down in your calendar, in your diary,
South
whatever.
Fan and Peters Township fans that are tuning in right now
they're not going to like me. I know. And you know what? There's a donut hole in Penn-Trafford's losing record, and they won their section by almost 30 points. So, proof is in the pudding, in my opinion.
And again, that win at Upper St. Clair, I think the committee will take note of, because what Penn-Trafford did, in addition to going undefeated, and I will say that South Fayette and Peters Township, I think their losses were outside of the WPIAL. So I believe all three teams actually were perfect against WPIAL competition. But knocking off what are pretty clearly the top two teams in 6A in Norwin and then Upper St. Clair, especially defeating the Panthers on the road, that's a statement in terms of we deserve the number one seed. And does it make that much of a difference? In some brackets, no. In this bracket, I think it does, because you look at 2 and 3 likely meet in the semis. So whichever teams don't get the number one seed, it becomes all the more difficult to make it to the championship round. So I think 1, 2, 3, and then a big drop off to number 4 means that the number one seed is absolutely massive in that bracket. Well, another team that's vying for a number one seed is the Belle Vernon area boys, and they've had a terrific finish to the regular season, Jack. But at least in this past few days, the talk has not been about their championships hopes, but rather their head coach, Joe Salvino, announced that after the season ends, he will step aside. A 40-plus year head coaching career. He will finish second all-time in the WPIAL for boys basketball wins, but he hopes he goes out on top, and I think he's got the team to do it. Is this a motivating factor? Is that why it was announced now? He mentioned that he wanted to do it when there's going to be a little bit of a layoff, but I think it's also like, well, all the players, everyone now knows what's at stake for the Leopards to see if they can kind of send off their legendary coach with one last championship.
It's incredible to see how, teams will bond over something like this. They will get together and use this as a motivating factor. And I could see Belle Vernon, and I remember when we've talked about them before on the show, Sean, if you take away that stretch where they had guys missing for, I think it was a 4-game stretch, 3 to 5 game stretch, You take that away, they have like one loss. I mean, I think we could be sitting here saying how Belle Vernon could be a number one seed potentially in the classification. I know that they would have
will be.
Yeah.
I think they will be.
I mean, and so we could be talking about them in such an even higher level than we have. So, this is a team that I think is going to be really dangerous. And when you add this aspect in, their coach is going to be retiring, legendary coach. He's been a champion before. I mean, I could see the guys getting around and saying, "Hey, let's do this one last time for coach. I mean, let's make another big run at it." So if I'm a team that's facing Belle Vernon, I don't want to say shaking in my boots, but I would be a little scared because they not only have talent, but then they have this added motivating factor behind them, and that's a recipe for a scary team.
Could it be motivating? Certainly. Could it also be more pressure and a little bit of a distraction? Possibly. But if there's one person I trust to know the best way to approach it, it is a guy that has won 750 or thereabout career games. So Joe Salvino certainly knows what he's doing. I'm sure it's a very calculated decision on his part. And congrats to him, but we hope that we don't have to finally send him off for several more weeks, because that means the Leopards would have made a deep postseason run. Well, that's our starting 5 takeaways. Let's now look at plays of the week. And Jack, we've got 5 of them to get to. I want to get your thoughts on some of these games that you had a first front row seat at. We'll begin with the Norwin girls, and the Knights secured an outright section title courtesy of a rivalry win against Hempfield Area on Thursday, highlighted by Kendall Berger's nifty feed to Lexi Heller in the second quarter, as detailed by myself and Roger Downs.
They weren't prolific shooting it last time against the Big Macs, but did just enough. What a feed! Berger to Heller for 2.
Heller in pretty good position there in the paint. Great unselfish play there by Kendall Berger.
A spectacular feed.
We spent so much time talking about Kendall Berger as a scorer. Certainly she is that, but she showed her playmaking ability, and that was a nice senior connection on senior night there for the Knights. We continue plays of the week with the Penn-Trafford girls, and the Warriors left no doubt in claiming section supremacy against Indiana Area, punctuated by Olivia Weissar beating the buzzer to send her team into the locker room with a big lead, with Jack on the call.
He's rocking the Penn-Trafford Baseball WPIAL championship hat, trying to channel some of that championship winning. Olivia Weissar at the buzzer. Oh my goodness! You want to win a section title, you got to make plays like that. And we go to the half, a 31-15 Penn-Trafford lead. They finish the second quarter on an 11-0 run.
This was an incredible change of the game. I think this was the turning point of the game, really. I remember interviewing Coach Danikas after. He said, yeah, that 3, but right there, that was the turning point of the game. And it was an 11-0 run going to the locker room, and Penn-Trafford never looked back.
We'll continue plays of the week with the Greensburg Central Catholic girls, and although they ultimately came up short against Shady Side Academy, Erica Gribble did her part, including an improbable buzzer beater at the end of the third stanza, as I captioned the action.
7.3, plenty of time for the Centurions. Gribble looks a little gassed, though. Back to Gribble. She's going to have to heave it up here. It will count, and it banks in! What a shot off of glass by Gribble, and we are all square as we head to the fourth quarter. Don't go anywhere.
Unbelievable job by Erica Gribble. A huge turnaround from the last performance she had against Shady Side. And hey, they can bring this into the playoffs, even though a loss. Learn a lot from a loss.
Did she mean to go glass there, Jack? What do you say?
I think she called bank. I think so. I'd give it to her.
Perfect. We'll continue with GCC, but this time on the boys' side. It was a back-and-forth affair, as expected, with Jeannette. It appeared destined to come down to the wire, but Liam Gallagher created some breathing room late in the fourth with his clutch three-pointer, with Jack and Greg Bizignani highlighting the play.
90 seconds to go. GCC trying to escape out of this one and stay unscathed in section. Tarpley. Gallagher unloads. Bingo! Timeout GCC. Liam Gallagher with one of the biggest shots of the season. And we'll take the timeout ourselves. 4-point GCC lead right here on WSN.
Safe to say, Sean, this might be the biggest shot of the maybe season for GCC and for even Liam Gallagher. Unbelievable job. He hit huge shots down the stretch.
That's a massive, massive win in a crazy environment there at GCC. We wrap up Plays of the Week with the Kiski Area boys, and in guiding the Cavaliers to a section crown for the first time in a long time, Amari Gonzalez, that's his spot in Kiski Area history. His and one in the second quarter was one of the biggest plays in the win, with myself and Greg Bizignani on the commentary.
That's a very sharp angle. Cavaliers throw it ahead to Gonzalez. As he gallops in, and one. What a finish by Amari Gonzalez.
One thing that zone, a lot of people don't realize, but that 2-3 zone makes it easier to run out. A lot of times you have your two guards at the top, they can break out a lot faster, and that's exactly what happened the last two possessions. They got to stop it out of the 2-3 zone, were able to get an easy transition, and they beat Penn Hills back twice.
Well, if you're the Cavaliers, there's some comfort in having a Gonzalez with the basketball in his hands. Isaiah, his older brother, was terrific, now playing football collegiately. Amari, and there's a younger brother as well that's on the team right now. So that's been a terrific family tradition, I would say, for Cavaliers basketball. Well, Jack, let's now look at our team of the week. And this is one where they earned it with what they did this past week. Sometimes it's based on what the team has done over several weeks, kind of a body of work. This was all about this past week for Greensburg Salem girls, because they won two really heart-pounding victories. They knocked off Westmoreland in a game that came down to the buzzer. Surprising that it was that close against the Titans, 41-39. But the win that really opened eyes and cemented their spot in the playoffs, they scored a home win against Greater Latrobe, 48-46, in which the Golden Lions scored the final 8 points of that contest. So they were down, if you do the math, 46-40. They score 8 in a row to win it. They also had a win lopsided at Gateway. So this team is postseason bound. They're 13-8 overall. They finished 6-6 in Class 5A Section 2. And from where they were when we saw them much earlier in the season before the calendar turned to 2025, I think they're clearly a better team now. And who knows, maybe this momentum can translate to a postseason run as well.
I've been so impressed with how they've been able to overcome the graduation of 4 college players. I mean, they had 4 college players from last year, one of them playing Division II basketball. That's a lot to have to overcome. And I think a lot of teams would look at this season as, ooh, this might be a rebuild for us. And instead, an otherwise very young team is going to the playoffs. And I think that, Sean, I have this written in my notes. Call me crazy, but this Greensburg Salem team reminds me of what Penn-Trafford girls was maybe 3 years ago, 2-3 years ago, where they had a lot of talent. They were very young, and they were trying to kind of figure it out. They would be that 4th place team, maybe 3rd place team, and find their way in the playoffs. And look at where Penn-Trafford is now. I mean, we just talked about them being the best team in 5A. So I think the future's very bright for Greensburg Salem, and I think it was huge for them, confidence-wise, that they're able to get to this point of the year, playing good basketball at the end of the season, going into the playoffs. And again, you've got very little senior help. You have very little junior help. It's mostly sophomores, some freshmen as well. Vienna Javicki, I was really impressed with her when we saw them play Penn-Trafford.
She's talented, no doubt.
And she has a lot of energy, and she plays with a lot of energy. And I think when you've got a freshman like that, and I remember, looking at an article that Coach Rick Klimchak was interviewed in, he said it's a big jump from middle school to high school basketball. And there's no question about that. And so a player like Javicki, 6 months removed from that, that's impressive. She's been able to make that transition. And then you've got Maya Heasley as well. She's been playing pretty good basketball. Have her for another season as well, being that lone scoring threat. You do lose Blessing Gant, so that's going to be a big loss in the post department. And then Reagan Kerr as well is somebody else that, could also be a big loss with her being such a versatile player. But I think also, let's not forget, Sean, they jumped up in classification this year, if I'm not mistaken. And so, you lose 4 college players, you jump up to 5A. People are like, ooh, I don't know. And what do? They come out and they've got a winning record and they're in the playoffs. Hats off to Coach Klimchak and the job he's done and just the job that this whole program has done.
So they won that game against Greater Latrobe on Tuesday. I was expecting that I would see him on Wednesday and congratulate him, because I was actually doing the Pitt Greensburg men's basketball game, and he is an assistant to his son. However, he was not in attendance. He was busy instead at Pitt Greensburg, where the women's team hosted the Carlo women's team. And that was a matchup of two players that played for the Golden Lions a year ago who are now playing collegiately. So Mackenzie Spann for Pitt Greensburg went against Gia Rosensteel for Carlo. So Coach Klimchuk took his team now to go see their former teammates there. So pretty cool moment. He's every single day he's doing something involving basketball. So he's a great coach, and certainly they are peaking, it feels like, at the right time. They are postseason bound, and their biggest reward of all, they are our Westmoreland on the Hardwood team of the week. Well, Jack, normally at this point, we run down all of the games this upcoming week. We don't have a lot to go by because Monday, there are some non-section games. All the section games are done at this point. And then, as we mentioned, the brackets are going to come out. The playoffs will begin as early as Thursday. We'll see. I would imagine Thursday and Friday primarily will be the preliminary round games, which some brackets don't have any of those games. And then I think once you get to Saturday, the likelihood is that's when most of the Westmoreland County teams could potentially open their postseason. So we'll see how that plays out. We do know the Monday games. On the boys' side, I know Corey Smith, when we talked to him post-game, was excited about this one. His Cavaliers playing a rivalry matchup at Burrell. Southmoreland at Dairy Area, a battle of two postseason teams. Greensburg, Salem at Indiana. Also on the girls' side, Dairy Area at Mount Pleasant. Highlands at Kiski Area. Plum at Greensburg, Salem, talking about Coach Klimchuk and his gals. They will be hosting the Mustangs. And then collegiately, Seton Hill is actually off this week. So Pitt Greensburg at La Roche on the men's side on Wednesday, and two really good teams in the AMCC. And then conference you're very familiar with, the PAC, St. Vincent at Allegheny College for a doubleheader on Saturday. I know we don't have a lot to talk about. What jumps out from the few games that we did highlight, though?
I think Kiski Area and Burrell boys. I mean, it'll be fun to see how Kiski kind of builds off of a Gazoon tight.
Thank you.
I think that would be a fun game to see, just to see how Kiski Area not bounces back, but builds off of a very emotional big win on Friday, right? Winning a section title and, first one in a long time. So how do you kind of keep the vision going and not get, I guess, too big of a head? And I think the Plum and Greensburg-Salem game will be fun to see. I know the Plum girls have had kind of an up and down year, but Greensburg-Salem would be interesting to see how they can finish off the regular season. If they can get, 14 wins for the Golden Lions wouldn't be too shabby going into the playoffs. But yeah, those are the two big ones that jump out. And then St. Vincent and Allegheny, just saw the Bearcats myself not too long ago. They suffered a tough loss to Westminster. And in very St. Vincent fashion, they bounced back with a big win against W&J over the weekend.
Talking about the men?
Yes, the men. Yes. And so I think that's a big one for the men. And on the women's side, that's going to be a fun game between St. Vincent and Allegheny. Allegheny having a really good season in the PAC women's wise. So that'll be a fun one on Saturday up in Meadville. I know you love Meadville, Sean.
You're not going to be making that trek up there, are you, Jack?
No. Are you making the trek up there?
No, you could drive me next time we go up there.
Maybe.
Together,
yeah.
Maybe.
Okay. Fair enough.
So as we mentioned, the big story for this upcoming week will be the playoffs. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have great coverage on our website throughout. Hopefully we'll be able to do some playoff games pretty soon as well. But what I could tell you is my plan is to have a ballpark of about 15 to 18 coaches interviews with some of the playoff bound teams. It's just impossible to do every single coach for Westmoreland County playoff team since there's so many of them, but we'll try to get as many as I can before I self-destruct. So we'll have that. I'm sure we're going to have an article kind of detailing all of the matchups after they're released. You want to stick around for all this content that we're going to have. And of course, our score tracker is great. So many people say, where's the best place to find scores? Well, if you're looking for Westmoreland County teams, it's Westmoreland Sports Network. Go to our website, westmorelandsports.com. The score tracker, Flick and crew do a great job updating that. And I'm sure that's going to be getting a lot of use once we get into Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and certainly the next week as well. So it's going to be a very, very exciting time. And for our next show, Jack, we'll have a little bit different perspective because we will likely have some postseason games under our belt, but there'll be some other teams that are in the midst of a long layoff. It's just the reality of it. Sometimes teams go almost 2 weeks without playing postseason basketball. So an exciting time of year if you're a high school basketball fan around here. That'll do it for this edition. But again, we'll be back next week. We'll be in the thick of the playoffs. So for my colleague Jack Ridenauer, Sean Myers signing off. We'll catch you again down the road on the Westmoreland on Hardwood podcast.
This is the Westmoreland on the Hardwood podcast on the Westmoreland Sports Network.